I remember the days of the Sega Saturn. Shining Force 3 was one of my favourite games for the system. In fact, the Shining series in general was one of Sega's most respected franchises, so back in the early 2000s I was really excited when I heard that a new Shining game was coming to the Game Boy Advance. But it released to, shall we say, mixed reception. Half of the fanbase thought it was mediocre, the other half compared it to a sausage that had already been digested. Twice. Unlike most of the previous Shining titles, Shining Soul is an action RPG. The object of each level is to kill all the enemies. When the game decides that you've killed enough enemies, it'll open the door to the next area. Put simply, it's a poor man's Diablo, just with cuter character sprites. There are 4 classes you can play as. For this playthrough, I decided to play as the Wizard and name her after Sailor Mercury. Our first problem is how relentless the enemies are. You've got so many of them spawning so rapidly that you'll quickly be overwhelmed. In most beat-em-ups, when you defeat all the enemies you need to move on, there's a period of peace and quiet where no one bothers you while you move on to the next set of enemies. Let's call this the Halcyon period, referring to a Greek term for a period in time when there are no storms. That's where Halcyone from Bravely Default 2 gets its name from. Anyway, Shining Soul forgoes this Halcyon period and just has enemies respawning every 2 seconds. The patterns are all the same too. They'll just run at you, crowd around, and swipe away. The only memories that were really memorable were these green fellows. They're supposed to be minotaurs, but they look more like Teenage Mutant Boxer Frogs. At the start of the game, the Wizard does hardly any damage to enemies. The reason seems to be her low strength stat, which does make a bit of sense, except when you realise her weapons are spellbooks. Spells are supposed to use the intelligence stat, not strength. But it turns out her spellbooks actually do count as a physical attack unless you charge them beforehand, and then it counts as a magic attack. But to charge up the spell, you need at least 1 skill point of a spell you want to use. Skill points are used to level up the different weapons you can equip, and 1 or 2 other quirks like elemental resistances. You get 1 skill point whenever you level up, so I'm stuck doing minuscule damage until I get Mercury to the next level. I've only just started playing, and I've already run into a bad design choice. Instead of a normal level up system where you get a notable increase to all of your stats, you get points to assign. In theory, this is fine. Combined with the skill points, it allows for customization, so that say for example, your swordsman can potentially be different to your friend's swordsman. The problem is, you only get 4 points per level up, so you can either have a small but balanced level up, or a single more substantial upgrade. When I finally got Mercury to level 2, I upgraded the freeze spell since it can freeze enemies solid for a few seconds, giving you a little bit of breathing room. I also focused on increasing her intelligence, since it increases spell damage and MP. But even with the increase in MP, you'll still be running out of it very quickly because of the endless waves of enemies. Okay, I've got another level up, so I just need to assign my stats to... Wait, what? Why is she taking damage? What the hell's hitting her? It turns out you can't pause the game. When you bring up the menus in a dungeon, the enemies get to move around freely and gang up on you, while you can't fight back.
You unmitigated, unprincipled bastard!
Okay, I understand why they did this. It's supposed to be a multiplayer experience. But what about single player? Do the developers even give a thought to social outcasts like me, people who don't have a lot of friends to play video games with? I got onto the boss and was able to beat him with my ice magic. Then when I got back to town, I visited Stella, the item appraiser. You see, throughout the game, enemies drop items. Gold, weapons, armour. Some of them will have a question mark over them, and they can't be equipped until you get them appraised. Now, this is admittedly one of the more exciting parts of the game. A lot of the time, in addition to a much needed boost to your defense, they also offer other perks like elemental resistances and a boost to your other stats. It's sort of like those blind bag toys, or a booster pack in a trading card game. You never know just how good the item's going to be until you open it up. Now, if only I had a Loot Crate sponsorship, this would be a perfect time to segue into it. Now, the second boss is where things get interesting. They introduce it as the Titan Fighter, but when you actually fight it, you'll be greeted with a very familiar sight. Well, familiar to hardcore Shining series fans at least. When I first played this game in my youth, you wouldn't believe how much I fanboyed when I first saw this boss. I was all, oh my god! It's the Colossus from Shining Force 3! Seeing such an iconic boss character from one of my favourite obscure games of all time, it was just such an amazing feeling. But I lost. So I tried again, and lost again, just to get shouted at by this uppity centaur. Okay, 3rd time's a charm. Lost again, and I get shouted at some more. Look, at least Mercury's actually trying! What are you doing to help, you ungrateful brony? This is the point that I had an epiphany. No, not an epiphany about why most failed writers go on to become bloated alcoholics. I reached that point before I even put pen to paper. I simply don't have the time and patience to beat this game with a wizard. Yes, her infernal spell is theoretically good for crowd control, but with her MP limitations, the time needed to charge a spell, and the near endless waves of enemies, she's just not cut out for a single player campaign. Even though I boosted her intelligence stat as much as I could, she still runs out of MP before I can get that far into the stage, and all the enemies take too many hits to kill. She's a glass cannon that has neither the firepower nor the ammunition needed to get the job done. I thought she would be useful in a multiplayer party, but in single player, every mission ends with her as a damsel in distress. Just look at her when she's low on health. Help. That just about sums the whole thing up. It wasn't an easy decision, but I decided to start over again with a new character. This time I chose the dragon route. I went with a red colour scheme and decided to give him a good Welsh name. Right, lovely boys! It has become clear to me that your minds are full of lustful and lewd thoughts. Soldiers have had this problem for years, and we have 3 solutions. Violent exercise, cold showers, or find a bit. You cannot find a bit because you've chased away the only attractive woman in this dungeon. Oh dear, how sad, never mind. You cannot have cold showers because of the water shortage.
So, that leaves us with violent exercise.
Okay, now that I'm playing as the tank character, fighting the random enemies is a lot easier. But there's still a big frustration factor. You see, you also have a dexterity stat that determines how often you hit and get hit, so if you don't keep your dexterity high enough, you run the risk of every single enemy turning into an evasion tank. I swear, my attacks missed 3 out of 4 times. Grrr! That also sums the whole thing up. So for a lot of levels afterwards, I spent most of my level up points increasing Gellert's dexterity, but even when I got it to level 70, he still misses half the time. This is especially evident with the ball and chain weapons. Seriously, he misses with that ball so often it's like the World Cup finals all over again. Then there's this level with these incredibly annoying teleport mazes. I took much longer on this than I should have because there's so many dead ends and one-way systems. Now, I can appreciate the developers giving you a challenge with more to it than just fighting, but come on, be honest. Does anyone actually like teleport mazes? I made it back up to the Colossus, and this time I beat him with no issues. Not bad considering that to beat him in Shining Force 3, Symbiotes had to cause a tidal wave to get rid of him. The next boss is none other than Bullsam, also known as Bullzone, the true final boss of Shining Force 3. Though not only is he less menacing than in his home game, they basically turned him into Starscream from the original Transformers series. What sort of an idiot deliberately tells everyone within earshot that he's planning to usurp the main villain? Smog-faced bloody vandal! So as you can see, the bosses are villains from past Shining Force games. The story is that Darksoul is summoning the Dark Dragon to rain destruction across the land. Sound familiar? It should. It's supposed to be a prequel to the original Shining Force game. Adam and Chaos are present, and at the end of the game you fight the Dark Dragon, the 2 robots seal him away with a Chaos Breaker. But it's just a missed opportunity to show their actual origins. Adam, Chaos and the Chaos Breaker were already present, making this prequel completely unnecessary. It doesn't tell the fans of the original Shining Force anything they'd want to know. The ending was just a complete letdown. All the frustration of getting to the end just for was basically, and they lived happily ever after. We don't see the kingdoms of the future games being built, a glimpse of the characters' lives afterwards, or anything that's even remotely satisfying. Since the Shining series' previous developer, Camelot Software Planet, left the franchise to work on the Golden Sun games, Shining Soul is considered the exact place where the series jumped the shark, so my final rating for this game is a 3 out of 10. Yes, the bosses from previous Shining games are nice fan service, but they don't make the game worth playing. It's like having a great actor in a terrible film, like Batman and Robin, a film so bad even George Clooney couldn't save it.
This is why Superman works alone.
The combat is tedious at best and frustrating at worst. The music is dull and forgettable, character growth is stunted, and the story is basically the first draft of a lazy self-insert fanfiction. It focuses on multiplayer, but very little forward to the single-player campaign, leaving social outcasts like me up the creek without even a canoe, let alone a paddle. Hell, even people with friends will be hard-pressed to find anyone willing to play this game with them because it's so boring and aggravating. And you know what else? There's a sequel. But the sequel is actually pretty good, so let's have a look at that one next.